Amen. Well, how many of you guys like personality tests? Personality tests? Okay, got a good chunk of you. You want to take a personality test? Okay, I found this one online, which means it is accurate. Okay? This personality test promises to unveil the depths of your soul and your design and the very reason for why you were made. You could have been searching for meaning in all 1,000 places, but it's all right here in this personality test that I found on the internet, and that it is only one question. It is only one question. And the question is, which shape do you like the best? Okay, so I want to show you 4 shapes. Can we show these 4 shapes? And based on these 4 shapes, just literally which one do you like the best? I want you to think about that for a moment. You can't click it, but you can think about it. And we're just going to do this thing live, okay? Do you got your shape? Raise your hand if you have your shape. Okay, are you ready for the depths of your soul and life, meaning, and purpose to be revealed by this one question? Okay, let's go through it. Raise your hand if you're an eyeball, okay, or if you picked an eyeball. Right? You were hesitant on the first question. Raise your hand if you picked I was an eyeball too. I love eyeballs, okay? They help me see. So I was an eyeball person as well. Here's what the test says about eyeball people, okay? Eyeball people, you are perfectionists. You're a perfectionist. You're always giving it 100, don't laugh. You're always giving it 110%. You are all in constantly, more than anybody else around you, and you have an intense focus in your life. And your gift to society, to your friends and your family members, they call it you're being judgmental, but really you're bringing focus to their lives. Okay, eyeball people, was it accurate? Raise your hand if it was accurate. How was it inaccurate? Need more information. Okay, all right. Next one. The triangle with the moon inside. The triangle with the moon inside. Here is what it says. Or is that a fingernail clipping? I don't know. Here's what it says about you. You are a connector. You love to connect with people. And you're not into that small talk. You don't want to go to like parties and like, hey, how you been? Yeah, get out of my face. No, what you want to go deep. Now, immediately, let's have a Bible study. Let's talk meaning of life. Unbear your soul to me. I just met you on the subway. We don't have subways. So you just love to go deep. You're not into small talk, and you love to just be kind of raw and real. You're a connector. Okay, fingernail people, raise your hand if that was you. Was that you? Raise your hand. Is it accurate? Yeah, kind of. Oh, yeah, you can't do that on a person. It's one question. All right, raise your hand if it was totally off the mark. Totally off the mark. You're Chris Holder. He is so into small talk. Just kidding. So, all right. Next up, the square in the triangle. I feel like, what's that game show? Circle gets the square. I don't know. So, triangle and square. Here is what it says about you. You're very personable. You also wear your emotions on your sleeve. What you feel is what you say. You're very outgoing. You're a people person, but there's a kind of caveat to that. It's more around people you know, not so much people you don't know. It's more like once you get to know them, the flower blossoms. Okay? All right, so how many of you square and triangle, was that accurate? Oh, pretty good. The test doesn't lie. How many of you was it way off the mark? Okay. All right. So last one, awkward. What is that? Like an egg? Okay. It's an olive? It's a black olive inside of a triangle. Okay, well, here's what it says. Raise a hand if that's you. Raise your hand. All right. Okay, I'm sorry, but it says that you're no fun at parties. I'm kidding. I made that up. It doesn't actually say that. So, no. I regret that. It says you're generous. You're very generous, and you're very open, and you're just, and it's not just with money, but with your time, with your energy, with just, you're the kind of person, it's like somebody call you, like you are there to help them, and according to the personality test, you think the world would be a much better place if everyone was kind to one another. Is that inaccurate? Can anyone say no to that? I wish we were all tyrants. Like, who is saying that? I think that's how the personality tests get us. They say things that could be true of everyone. Anyway, okay, so olive in a triangle. Was it accurate? Was it accurate? Do you want kindness? Are you anti-kindness? Raise your hand if you're anti-kindness. Okay, Jonathan Johnson is anti-kindness in the back. All right. Okay, so what in the world are we doing? Why are we taking this test? We're taking this test because it is a cultural commentary, a commentary on where we are at as a society. I don't know if you've noticed, but there has been a proliferation of personality tests online. Even the old tests, they're coming back. When you get on Twitter, someone's bio is like, I'm an INTJ, I'm a 7 with a wing of an 8, and I'm a SC, and you're like, what? And people have got it everywhere. There's an increase, research showing an increased fascination of it, there's kind of like the old school ones and the serious ones, and jobs are hiring people based upon this. And then you got like the goofy, silly ones like, Olive in a Triangle, or I've taken one before that promised to tell me my personality based on my order at McDonald's. Like, what? And so BuzzFeed's creating 24 of these a day. I mean, it's just insane. So there's this insane interest in personality tests, but then the flip side of that is that research is showing is that people are putting a whole lot of stock in what these tests are saying. People are saying, well, wow, I'm this, and therefore it means that. And sociologists are beginning to ask the question, why? Why is this happening? Why are we at this place as a society where everyone's taking these personality tests and everyone wants to know, like, what's inside of me and what does this mean? Like, what is going on? And of course, the sociologists just need to listen to me because I have a hot take on it. I want to share with you my hot take. Here's my opinion. I think you'll agree with me, though. Okay, for thousands of years. Well, as long as human beings have been around. As long as human beings have been around, we've been the only creature on the planet that asks the question, why? The animals all live by instinct, but God created man and woman in His own image, and part of that is we ask the question, why? And when we don't have an answer to the question, why, I mean, your dog doesn't care if he doesn't know why, but you care a lot. It can drive us insane. And throughout human history, as long as humans have been around, the answer to the why question has been discovered by looking outside of us to God or to some gods or religion, and especially from an early perspective, to parents. But then you have Western culture stepping into this, and Western culture has become increasingly secular, taken God outside of the picture, and now God is not allowed to tell you who you are. No gods or religion can tell you who you are. Your parents can't even tell you who you are. If you want to know who you are, here's how you do it. Look inside your heart. Just look inside of your heart. It's the mantra of the day. You be you. And you share your truth. And so as Western culture becomes increasingly secular, we put God out of the equation and truth out of the equation, we're looking for something to help us understand who we are so that we can know what is our place in this world and live a life of purpose and meaning. That's Michael's hot take. Now, here, let me say this. I'm not against personality tests. I mean, go on BuzzFeed and click on the hamburger one. It's kind of funny, okay? I take personality tests. Got no problem with them. And so I don't have a problem with them. But what I will say is this. That question, why am I here? God actually has an answer for that. He has an answer for that for all of humanity. He has a unique answer for you personally. Do you know the answer to the why question? Or are you kind of squashing it down, just kind of don't really want to think about those kind of things right now? Or are you chasing it in 1,000 different directions and not finding it and being disappointed at every turn? Or are you actually living for the purpose for which God made you? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, the scripture says that we are God's workmanship, His masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. In other words, before you were ever born, before the history of the world, God had a path laid out for your life. Do you know the path? Do you know it? And so that's what we're talking about today. And that's what we're talking about throughout this series. Uncharted is the name of this series. And as we turn the corner into this new year, As we turn the corner into this new year, lots of us are entering into uncharted territory. We don't know what's ahead. We don't know what the future holds. And so how can we, in the midst of this uncertainty, embrace the purposes of God for our lives and begin to live those out and to begin to walk those out? That is what we're going to be talking about starting today. Today we're going to talk about discovering that purpose and what that looks like. And then we're going to sort of map that out. The next 4 messages after this week, we'll kind of have a step by step by step. Next week will be step 2, the next week step 3, and you can see, oh, look at that little map. You can see the way there. And so we'll kind of unveil what those dots are as we go, and you're not going to want to miss next week with our special guest speaker, where his life message really encapsulates what step 2 is really about. And so that's our series, Uncharted. That's the path that we're going to be going today. We're going to be in the Scripture to explore this path, of course, and see what God has to say about it. We're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? And so if you brought your physical Bible with you, if you have an electronic Bible, that's okay. We'll also have the words up on the screen. If you have your physical Bible with you, it's just a couple of books after the Psalms, which is the biggest book of the Bible, right in the middle. And so Ecclesiastes, we're going to be in chapter 11. And a couple of things about this book of Ecclesiastes. It's unique amongst books of the Bible. So unique that lots of people have argued throughout history that Ecclesiastes doesn't even belong in the Bible. They say it seems too dark to belong to a book or a Bible that has so much hope in these other books. And Ecclesiastes is dark. Now there's really 2 phrases to understand, just to kind of help you understand the big, broad brushstroke of what Ecclesiastes is about. There are 2 sort of phrases that come up again and again in this book. Okay? One of them is the phrase, under the sun. Under the sun. And so when we come across this phrase in the book of Ecclesiastes, if you read the book beginning to end, you would come across it 30 times. He says, under the sun. And what this phrase means is it means life from God's perspective under the sun on the earth if God was completely taken outside of the picture. Solomon, the author of this 3,000 years ago, he's basically looking at life from a secular perspective. What is the meaning and the purpose of life if we look at it entirely secular? And that's why most of the book is dark, under the sun. Then the next phrase, really not a phrase, it's a word, is the word vanity. Vanity. And this word vanity appears 33 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, only 37 times in the rest of the entire Old Testament. So it's a huge theme. This word vanity means vapor or shortness of breath. Maybe when you walked out to your car this morning and you went, and you saw your breath go, and it disappeared just like that. And that's what Solomon says your life is. And you put all this together, and he says, okay, under the sun, we have all these pursuits and 1,000,001 things that we're doing over here. And Solomon looks at it all, and he says, it's just a vapor, just a breath, a passing thought, nothing more. And he begins and he ends his book with the words, vanity of vanities. That expression, it's a Hebrew expression. Sometimes we see this in the Bible, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, or Song of Songs. It means the supreme vanity. And so Solomon's assessment of all of life is it is a supreme vanity, a total passing breath, a nothing. And that's why some people say it doesn't belong in the Bible. But then in chapters 11 and 12, Solomon begins to kind of peel back the curtains a little bit of heaven and give us some of that perspective above the sun, the one who lives beyond the sun. And he gives us a little glimpse of this light. There's still the darkness, but a little glimpse of this light to sort of coax us into the beauty of this incredible life that God has called us to. So there's Ecclesiastes. Let's pick it up in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, we'll start with verses 1 through 6. Here's what he says. He says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on the earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. If a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow. He who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way of the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and that evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Okay, and so this section is a sort of cohesive unit. It'll start to shift in verse 7, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But verse 6, or 1 through 6, the sort of message of this section is this. I'm just going to say it. Uncertainty about God's work should change the way we work. Uncertainty about God's work should change the way we work. Okay. Did you notice the theme of uncertainty in this passage? We just read it. 3 times it uses that phrase, you do not know. In verse 2, he says, you do not know when disaster may fall upon the earth or may fall upon you. He says this in another part of the book too. He says, like fish taken in a cruel net and like birds on a snare. So people do not know the time of disaster when it suddenly falls upon them. You don't know when you might draw the black bean. You don't know when you might draw the short stick. You just don't know. And so Solomon says, we're uncertain of what will happen in the future. Then in verse 5, he says, you don't know the work of God and how he creates that baby in the womb and puts the Spirit inside of it. You don't know the work of God and what he will do. And then in verse 6, he puts it in terms of sowing and reaping. Sowing, that is planting seeds, reaping a harvest. He says, you don't know whether he's going to make that field prosper or that field prosper. All of these together, there's a theme of uncertainty, and all of these together are meant to communicate you don't know what God's going to do in the future. And it doesn't matter how close to God you feel like you might be. Maybe you pray and sing hallelujah all day long and you go to bed at night and like you feel the heartbeat of God on your pillow as you're going to sleep. I don't care how close to God you are, you don't know the future. It is uncertain. The work of God is uncertain. And so there are 2 responses to this that Solomon highlights. One of them is foolish, and the other is wise. There's a foolish and a wise response to the uncertainty of God's work. The foolish response is this: uncertainty can lead to paralysis by analysis. Uncertainty can lead to paralysis by analysis. You remember that when I was reading verse 3, I almost felt like a few of you were chuckling whenever it's like, if a tree falls here, it will lie down there. And then if a tree falls there, it will lie down there. If the wind blows, it will blow. And if a cloud is full of rain, it will fall. We're like, wow, I'm so glad I have that in the Bible. Like, I had no idea. Like, how? But it's not until verse 4 that you really understand what he's talking about. And that's where he says, he who regards the wind and the clouds is not going to reap, is not going to sow. What he's saying is, you can sit there looking at clouds and wind all day, waiting for perfect condition before you take a step forward, and you're never going to act. His point is, don't sit there just analyzing. We call it paralysis by analysis. You're stuck. And some of us, we get stuck because we're so worried about the future. There might be a recession, so I won't invest. And something bad might happen. I might get rejected for this job offer. And so we don't step out and we take a risk, and we just kind of like hold on and wait because of this paralysis by analysis. Some of us are stuck right now, and because of it, we're not walking in the purposes that God has for us. And he's saying, don't get stuck in paralysis by analysis. Don't wait for perfect conditions. 3 years ago, right here on the stage, I was preaching pretty much like the same message, different text. I don't actually reuse stuff, by the way. It's the same theme of purpose. What is God creating us for? And as I was just addressing this point in a particular message, I started to sort of, sometimes sermons become like pastoral confessions time. And mine was, I feel like my purpose, or at least a big part of my purpose, is that God made me a writer. Like every English teacher that I ever had growing up was always like, oh my gosh, you're such a good writer, you need to be a writer. And then I go into business, and then I become pastor. Anyway, so I always had this, that I felt like God had given me that. But then when I stand up on that stage 3 years ago, I said, well, I feel like God's made me a writer, but I don't have time to write because I've got a church to lead and lots of kids. And I guess I just kind of imagined in my mind that, like, one day when I was like 75 years old, you guys would get tired of listening to me, and maybe I'd retire and my kids would be out of the house and I'd have nothing better to do. So maybe I'd start writing then, and I'd just like throw down all these books that have been in me for decades. And I was just sitting there kind of complaining to God about it later and just kind of praying about it. And I just heard this voice of the Holy Spirit inside of my heart, just kind of like this little whisper, almost like this knowing. But he said, just work with what you have. Just do something with what you have. And I started thinking about that. And I said, I do preach pretty much every week. I do write a sermon pretty much every week. And so I said, you know what? Here's what I could do. It'd take a little bit more time. But I started 3 years ago. I started manuscripting out my sermons, just writing them. And it's not like I preach exactly from it, clearly. But I just started writing them out because it was part of this discipline where I felt like God was speaking to me about writing and becoming a writer. I said, I can do that. And I didn't have any plans for where this would lead. That was 3 years ago. And at the end of last year, I started to get some ideas rolling around in my head of how some of these old messages might string together and create something. And now, as we're in 2020 at the beginning, I fully expect that by the end of this year, I'll be publishing my first book. New York Times bestseller, I predict. So, here's my point. I don't have time to write, neither do you. I don't have time for this, you don't have time for that, but it says, you know what? In the morning, don't withhold, or in the morning, sow your seed. In the evening, don't withhold your hand. Just get to work. Analysis by paralysis. That's the foolish response. And now let's look at the wise response. And I'm already touching on it, but I'm just going to say it anyways. The wise response is that instead of uncertainty leading to analysis by paralysis, or vice versa, uncertainty should lead to diverse and decisive action. Uncertainty should lead to diverse and decisive action. I want to show you that in the passage we just read, starting with verse 1. You remember the verse where it says, cast your bread upon the waters, and after many days it'll come back to you? What's that talking about? Probably it's talking about maritime trade. It's talking about taking your investment, bread, and in that case, sending it overseas, sending it out of sight. What it's talking about is send that investment away, and then sometime later it will come back to you. What he's saying is, instead of sitting and worrying about the clouds and the wind and a tree that might fall down one way or another, he's saying make the investment, take decisive action. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till you're 75 and retired and all the books come out of your head. You don't know if you'll live till 75. Start today. Move decisively. That's what he's saying. Verse 2, he takes it to the next level. He says, don't just move decisively, but take diverse actions. He says, don't just put it on one ship. He says, give your portion to 7 or 8. And what he's saying is, if you just put all your investment in one basket, if you put all your bread on one ship and pirates come and hijack the ship, what happens to your investment? Well, it's gone. Yeah, and pirates are going to be like, bread, what's this? But if you have 7 or 8 ships and one goes down, guess what? You got a bunch of other ones. Diversify your investments. I'm going back to the UT Business School right now. Diversify. And so it's saying try lots of different things. And then verse 6, he says the same thing. He says, in the morning sow your seed, and in the night do not withdraw your hand. So it's not just do a bunch of different things, but it's do it in all times. And so kind of the theme of this section is do something, do lots of things, and eventually you will discover your thing. Let me say that again. Do something, do lots of things, and eventually you will discover your thing. And again, this comes back to uncertainty. We don't know which thing it is that God will bless. Sometimes, I think some of us, we're like waiting around for some special revelation, like I'm going to pray and take a personality test, and I'm going to pray, and God's going to show me what my purpose is. Come on, God, show me my purpose. And I think some of us were like, come on, God, just show me what to do and I'll do it. And God's like, just do something and I'll show you whether it was right or wrong. It's not like a farmer takes one seed and says, show me the place to plant it. He just starts going like this, planting it everywhere, paying attention to which ones sprout and which ones don't. Discovering your purpose is not just about a special revelation. It is about observation. What is God blessing and what is He not? Sometimes we're waiting for God when He's waiting for us to take decisive action, to take it immediately this Sunday afternoon, and to do lots of different things. That's how you discover your purpose. Do something, do lots of things, and eventually you will discover your thing. I think sometimes what happens to us is, we have this wonderful American ideal, and it is a wonderful ideal. It's part of why America has been so successful. You grow up in grade school, and you learn about Thomas Edison, and how many tried. It took him like 1,000 times to invent the light bulb. Everybody, you heard that story, right? So keep on trying. And so you hear this like, if at first you don't succeed, there you go. And so that's part of why America has been so successful, because we've got grit and we keep on trying. But I think I would modify that statement. I would say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. If at last you don't succeed, try something different. Like if you have an NBA dream and you're 4'7" and you're blind in one eye. Like it's time to give up the dream. Like you can't just... Like some things we fail, not for lack of effort, but because God's not in it. And I think some of us, it's like we've been plugging and plugging and plugging against a wall, against a wall, against a wall. And we're like, come on, God, move the wall. And He's saying the path is going that way. Like some of us, like we give up too easily, but some of us give up not easily enough. And there actually is a balance. Pay attention. God doesn't show you in advance, usually, where He's working. What you have to do is do something, do lots of things, and eventually you'll find your thing because you'll see that God is partnering with it, breathing life up on it, and blessing it. And if you've been running into a wall, open your eyes and look a different direction. It could be that there's a path going that way, and it's as clear as day. And so this is what uncertainty leads us to do. It shouldn't lead us to paralysis by analysis. I just need to stop saying that. It shouldn't lead us to paralysis. What it should lead us to is decisive action, moving now and doing lots of different things, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to keep reading. We're going to pick it up again in verses 7 through 10. Verses 7 through 10, and this will close out the chapter. Here's what it says. He says, light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. It's a breath. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the desire of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. So do you see the way the theme of this section has shifted? He's been going with this theme of uncertainty. You don't know the work of God. You don't know what God is going to do. Now he's shifting from a theme of uncertainty to a theme of certainty. Uncertainty is we don't know the work of God, but the certainty is that we all know, the death rate is 100%. We all know we're going to die. We all know this life is short. And so here's the theme of this section. Certainty about death should change the way we live. Certainty about death should change the way we live. And Solomon gives us sort of two expressions of this. How does it change the way we live? He gives us two expressions that stand out, which I'll tackle each in turn and show you from the Scriptures. The first one is that certainty of death makes us want to live fully. Certainty of death makes us want to live fully. And so verse 7, the first verse of the section, when Solomon says, light is sweet and it's pleasant to see the sun, he's not just saying, go outside and get some vitamin D. Light is a metaphor for life here. And what he's saying is, it's like he's saying, you know what? For most of this book, I've been talking about how dark and painful and frustrating and vexing life is. But I want you to know that my overall perspective It's like that old John Mayer song, The Heart of Life is Good. He says, my overall perspective is, you know what? Light is sweet. Despite the darkness, the pain and the frustration, the big picture is God has actually given us a really good life. And so he's saying, get out and live it to the full. He's saying, certainty of death makes us want to live fully. Twice he uses that word rejoice, verses 8 and verses 9. And he's saying life is good. So our general demeanor in life, like people shouldn't look at Christians and say, they're the Bible-thumping, mean, angry, sad, depressed people. People should be looking at Christians and say, wow, those people are marked by joy. Not like fake chipper joy, right? Not like, oh, the Lord's good, my house just burned down. Like we're real, but in the midst of pain, there is a well of joy that goes beneath it all. And he says, rejoice. The opposite of rejoice, he says in verse 10, it's not really, it's kind of like the flip side of the coin. The positive expression is rejoice. The negative expression of the very same thing is he says, remove vexation from you. What that means is that vexation, it's talking about like when you're working and like you see that spinny wheel on the of death when you're downloading something, it's like the internet's not working, okay? What he's talking about is the cares of life. He's talking about the red tape. He's talking about the things that frustrate you in your workplace and your family. He's talking about all the things that make you want to pull your hair out. He's talking about the things that make you anxious and depressed. And he's saying, you know what? Life's too short. Don't get caught up in all the cares of this world and being weighed down by all these burdens because it'll be over before you know it. And that's what he says. He shifts from the metaphor of light and then he goes to darkness. You remember he says the days of darkness will be many? You know what he's talking about there? He's talking about the end of our lives. He's saying, you know what? None of us are guaranteed. Disaster could happen to anybody. He says, none of us are guaranteed. But if you are lucky enough to live long, don't be deceived that you're going to be slam dunking the ball at 90, okay? Don't think that you're going to have all of your faculties in fullness of strength until the day you die if you make it that long. He's talking about the days when you're getting older and your body and your mind begin to downshift in preparation for the grave. He says, this is going to happen to everybody. So young man, he says, don't forget that. The days of darkness will be many if you're lucky enough to live that long. The downshifting will happen. It doesn't matter how much testosterone you take, it will happen. And so now, enjoy today. That's what he's saying. And then twice or three times, he uses that word youth. Youth. Did you see that? Why does he say that? Is that because this doesn't apply to old people? Is that because old people, you kind of washed up, your stars already shine, you don't have a purpose and a meaning in life, so let's just address the young people. They're the future, right? No, that's not what he's saying, okay? The reason he addresses young people is that old people don't need to be reminded that they're going to die soon. Right? Like you know it. Like, I'm sorry, but when I was in my 20s, I was like going to weddings every single weekend. I was like, man, every week, weddings all the time. I talked to my dad. He's got 3 funerals a week. He goes to his class reunion. He's like, there's nobody left. It's like my grandpa used to say. He's like, when he was getting old, he's like, they're dropping like flies. You feel it every time your body starts to hurt when the weather changes. You feel it when you got to ask your granddaughter how to use one of those fancy iPhones. Maybe not there, but the point is, you're closer. And you feel it in your body. You feel it. It's the young people. It's the young people that need to be reminded of this. We're the ones that forget. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a restaurant and there's people like, there's people everywhere there eating, they're doing their thing, and I've got my family with 4 kids, and everybody's like eating, there's like rolls flying across the table, and like people got claw marks on their face, like, William's a Wolverine, and like it's just chaos, and I'm trying to like control it, and some old lady will shuffle up, and she got a smile on her face, and she'll say, enjoy it while you can. And I'm like, you don't understand. She totally understands. I feel like, this is pastoral confession, I feel like I got to say I'm sorry to all the old people. who've been telling me all my life, blink and then it's gone. The days are long, but the years are short. When I look at my daughter Anna, I showed a picture of her last week in church as a when she was a baby. She's 12 years old today, and she is stunningly gorgeous, and she is turning into a beautiful woman. And I think about it, and I'm like, wow, the old people were right. It really does go fast. So I'm starting to believe you, old people. I won't say who you are. All this reminds me of a story. Anybody ever seen that show, Last Comic Standing? Anybody ever see that? No, some of you. Okay. A number of years ago, there was one of the contestants. His name was Mike DiStefano. Anybody remember him? A few of you. He was really funny. And anyway, so in fact, just to give you a taste of how this is how he opened some of his routines. I wrote it down because I just wanted to make you laugh. He says, "My name's Mike. I'm a stand-up comic. Before that, I was a drug counselor. Before that, I was a drug user. And before that, I was 12. That's his style of humor. He's like, I don't know if I can laugh at that, but that is funny. Well, in one of his acts, he does this bit, and people have kind of come back later and called it The Last Ride with Franny. The Last Ride with Franny. Anybody ever seen this? And so he tells a story, and it's like this whole serious bit. He tells a couple of jokes in it. You're like, I don't know if I could laugh. But the whole thing is like he gets really serious, tears up on the stage when he's telling the story. And he tells a story about falling in love with a young lady named Franny. They were both in their youth. They were both in their 20s, and they met in a drug rehab. And they fell fast in love, and they got out of the rehab, and they got off drugs, and they started living life, and they started doing things together, and everything was going wonderful. And then Franny got a fever, and the fever wouldn't go away. And so they took her to the doctor, thinking, is this going to be flu? Is this going to be cold? Like, what is this? Why won't this go away? Doctor comes back and says, it's AIDS. She has AIDS, and she's going to die really soon. And so that was a huge shocker, obviously. But to add shock to that, this probably shocked everybody, he finds out she has AIDS, so he decides to marry her. And they get married, and a short time later, she's in hospice. She is soon to die. And she's getting thin and emaciated and wasting away in a hospice bed. The time is coming soon. And he's coming up and back and forth to the hospice, and he's thinking, what does she need? What does she want right now? And he thinks maybe she just wants me to take her eyes off of big serious things. So he rides up his brand new Harley Davidson motorcycle to the hospice, and he says, Franny, you want to see my motorcycle? And she gets out of bed, and she kind of shuffles to the door, and she's got a big long, the IV pole, and it's got the morphine drip going. And she looks out at the motorcycle, and she keeps on walking, and she gets on it. She says, can we go for a ride? Okay. And so he gets on the motorcycle, and Harley Davidson, they're loud. And he starts it up, and he starts going around in the parking lot. She's literally dragging a morphine pole with her. And so I'm just hearing the scrape on the ground, and the Harley. And so everyone else is hearing this, and dying people begin to come out of their rooms and watch, and they start clapping. And the staff is coming out, and they're applauding, and everyone is celebrating and cheering. He says, then I heard this loud bang. Something crashed to the ground. He said, I thought it was Franny. He said, I thought I was going to have to explain to her family that your daughter almost died of AIDS, but I killed her on a motorcycle. Again, you don't know whether or not to laugh. He says, I turn around, it was her throwing down the pole. Now she's just holding the bag. And she says she's rubbing my chest, and she's saying, can we get on the highway? He says, I thought of all the pain and the sadness and the death that had been surrounding us, and I said, yeah, we can do that. And so he gets on the highway, and he says, we got up to 80 miles an hour. We're passing cars. He says, when you're on a motorcycle and you feel so free and that wind is going through your face. And this was a statement that he made that just stuck with me. That's why I remember when I saw it a few years ago. He says, the wind's just going through our face as we're on this motorcycle, and he says, for 10 minutes on that ride, we felt like normal people. For 10 minutes on that ride, the wind just blew all the death off of us. He said she was screaming with childish delight, morphine bag flapping, hospice bag going, and she's just screaming with pleasure and joy because she knew her moment was coming soon, and she was going to enjoy today as much as possible. Especially young people, remember, if you haven't begun losing your faculties yet of your mind and your body, enjoy today. The light is sweet. Remove the vexation from your mind and your body. Let go of those cares of the world. Life is too short to be weighed down by the mountain of little things and to-do lists that are surrounding you. Live life to the full. Older folks know this. The older folks know this. We younger folks, we're trying to listen. But the certainty of death, it does that to us. The young people forget it. We live like we're never going to die. But here's the thing. You'll never live life to the full unless you realize how short it really is. You'll blink and it's gone. Now, one last point, closing. I said the certainty of death makes us want to live fully, but here's the last point. The certainty of death makes us want to live fully for God. It makes us want to live fully for God. I want to read one more time, verse 9. Ecclesiastes 11:9. He says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. And here's the part I want us to focus on. He says, walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. I love how permissive this statement is. It's almost like Solomon's version of what God originally said in the Garden of Eden. You know, he creates these two perfect human beings, man and woman, Adam and Eve, and then he creates this perfect garden. I mean, you've seen beautiful gardens. Imagine one planted and cultivated by God. Okay, this was beautiful. Beautiful trees, incredible. And he says, you know what? You can have every fruit imaginable. You can have everything, a million delights. Just don't eat the fruit of that one tree. And of course, you know what they did, right? They ate the fruit and plunged humanity into sin and death and all the despair and darkness that we see in this world. But here Solomon's coming, and he's saying essentially the same thing. Follow the desire of your hearts and your eyes. This is especially striking when you've read the whole book of Ecclesiastes. Because at the beginning of the book, in chapters 1 and 2, this is kind of a famous section of the book. And Solomon starts to recount all the ways in which he followed the desire of his heart and the desire of his eyes. And he keeps using those two phrases, my eyes, my heart, my eyes, my heart. Wherever they went, Solomon went. If it was the pleasures of this world, I mean, to whatever degree you have tried to indulge yourself in worldly pleasures, you have not even touched on what Solomon did, okay? This is a guy who had 300 wives and 700 concubines. Call it 1,000 lovers at his disposal at any moment, okay? He went through a season of life where he just basically left God, completely forgot about God, lived as though there was nothing except this life under the sun. He lived like a secular person, but he was a king, so he could do whatever he wanted. And so he says, from there, I tried to become a philosopher and excel in wisdom and knowledge. He says, but I found that was vanity. He says, from there, I tried to become a party animal. That was vanity. From there, I started building things and creating things and planting gardens and building cities. Vanity. I achieved more than anyone else in my day. Vanity. I became the greatest of any king there ever had been. Vanity. And he keeps coming back and he says, everything I did was pointless, meaningless, and worthless, and nothing when I followed my eyes and my heart. And now he comes back to chapter 11 and he says, do everything I did. Well, maybe marry a few less people. But he says, follow the desire of your heart and your eyes. So discovering your purpose, it's not just about like, again, God just tell me what to do and I do it. It's about just do it all. Do lots of things. Do everything. Know that God will bring you into judgment. And that might have curbed some of Solomon's behavior. But at the end of the day, God is not a God of no who's a cop in the sky just telling you all the things you can't do. He's a God of yes, saying, here's a world at your fingertips. Go discover, explore, build, plant, create, dream, envision. Go and do it. Genesis 1, this is the purpose man was created, to go and do and build and create. This is what you were for. This is what he made you for. And the more you do it, the more you'll begin to discover your individual specialized purpose and reason for being created. You say, but what about that last little bit about judgment? That's the part that troubles me. Well, there's really two sides to this. On one side, yes, it should curb our behavior a little bit. We should probably not go so far as Solomon did. But it's really more than that. It's really not God as some big cop in the sky. What this judgment is about, what it's trying to communicate, is that after we die, we will stand before God, and He will look at everything that we've done. And this means something about the value of the things that we've done. If an eternal God judges everything you do, then that means that everything you do is eternally important. Let me say that again. If an eternal God judges everything you do, then everything you do is eternally important. This was not meant to be a threat to us. Yes, it should curb some ridiculous behavior, but it's actually meant to infuse us with hope and meaning that there's actually a purpose to this whole life that extends beyond the sun. And that is why Jesus came. That is why Jesus came. When Jesus came, He looked down 2,000 years ago and He saw a people that were chasing hopes and dreams of all these things that I want to do in 1,000 different directions and rejecting God in the process. And when He looked down, rather than feeling anger and resentment and judgment, instead He felt compassion. And so Jesus came and He lived. And when He came, in John 10:10, you know what He says? He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Jesus is not, He's not the God of no, He's the God of yes. He wants to give you a full and abundant life, but it's important for us as believers to understand what our fullness of life cost Him. Jesus came and He lived, and for us to live a life that was full, He had to have His life cut off on the cross. Jesus took that judgment for us so that the word judgment doesn't have to be a threatening gray cloud in the sky kind of word. That word judgment can be a word that infuses our life with hope and meaning because it means that what we do under the sun matters. And so Jesus took that judgment for us, and then 3 days later, He rose again so that just like the wind on Franny's motorcycle, He could blow all the death off of us. And so that we could live a life that's full, not for 10 minutes on a motorcycle ride, but forever and ever and ever. You want to know the heart of your God? That is the heart of your God, a God who was emptied so that you might be made full. Let's pray.